Ahoy, mateys! Welcome to Keatown, home of all things Keaton. This is your captain speaking, Captain Keaton. Yeah! In today's video, we're going to take a look at the iconic, classic, cryptic Legend of Zelda for NES. What a great place to begin our journey. So let's start off by saying that NES Zelda has aged beautifully. As far as I see it, this game has withstood the test of time. And I didn't always think so. Last year, when I first played it through, I was convinced that the latter stages were far too difficult, and the overworld at times way too cryptic. But after acclimating to the game and replaying it, I can safely say that The Legend of Zelda is more than just doable, it is rightfully up there as one of the greatest games of all time. Now look, I don't pretend to be any type of expert on the first Zelda game. In fact, I grew up with Ocarina of Time as my first. But Zelda 1 is still an intrinsic part of any gamer and Zelda fans' vocabulary, regardless of their age, and it is very much worth knowing about and playing today. The story actually starts on a peripheral for the Famicom called the Famicom Disk System. Ever heard of it? Well, that's because it's Japan only. It was an add-on. The Japanese version originally released for that system called Zelda no Densetsu. It released on a floppy disk, of all things, and it has a number of regional differences due to the medium. My favorite of these is that it utilized the built-in microphone or something, so you had to use it to defeat Pole's voice, these stupid bunnies that hop around the dungeon. Honestly, they seemed kind of out of place in the later dungeons. They weren't too difficult compared to the rest of their enemies, so I was wondering what was going on there, but yeah, that's a funny little difference, and I'm kind of glad that I didn't have to use a microphone when playing it recently. The version that we know and love for the Nintendo already knew it was going to sell like hotcakes. I mean, look at this cartridge. It's made in majestic gold. I mean, I can't say this thing has aged beautifully, but gosh, would I want one for my collection. The game has become a game of many early trends. It was an early adopter of battery-powered RAM, making it savable. It was an early template for the action RPG genre, and inspired many to come. And it also inspired a tips and tricks magazine for Nintendo games solely, the first one being The Fun Club, where many gamers would turn to tips and tricks to help beat the game. It eventually led to the inception of Nintendo Power, the means by which many people did end up actually beating The Legend of Zelda.
We beat it. So the thing is, you can beat it without the internet if you have the map, hint book, and instruction manual. It tells you pretty much what to do. And as a kid, you got the time, after school and friends to do it. So it wasn't that bad to beat. There was also Nintendo Power. I'm sure there was tips in there that he had, and I got a subscription later that had tips. And through that, you've kind of hear. It's almost like Nintendo Power game magazines were the internet of the day, because a lot of games that are considered very cryptic, everybody knew the secrets because they just had Nintendo Power, like the Simon's Quest, Tornado. I don't know how I knew it. I never read it. I just knew it.
The game really has quite a legacy. I mean, even booting it up, it's clear that this is about to be epic. In the start menu, players are greeted by the iconic series theme song, fashioned in 8-bit chiptune. Gosh, this thing is so memorable, and I mean, this is just the first game. It's an incredibly complex ballad, and it symbolizes the nature of the journey that is about to unfold. And while there was supposed to be a different song used for this title screen, it's probably the right thing that they went ahead and made this version.
It might probably one of the things that got me into liking like fantasy style things. I remember always wishing there'd be a movie of it. But also the music too. It was Koji Kondo who did the music, and there's only like 2 or 3 tracks in the whole game, but they're all bangers. Like a lot of times you would have the game on, stuck in the dungeon or stuck out in the outer world, not knowing where to go, but that music's just looping over and over and over. I know you were saying it's probably only like 15 or 30 seconds, but it's like really, really like a good music, and I didn't really mind having it on there. And it actually, well, it was a big part in why I like the game so much. Was the main Zelda theme. I know it was based on a classical piece. I can't think of what it is right now, but when I hear the piece it's based on, I don't really hear it. I hear its own thing. Like it's its own nice little tune, like very catchy little tune.
Story time. Apparently, there was a copyright incident involving the original song for the game. In a 2016 Nintendo interview commemorating the NES Mini, Koji Kondo reflects on how he originally used a classical theme called Bolero by Maurice Ravel. This thing was like 15 minutes and I tried listening to it, and yeah. The copyright law in Japan at the time declared that 50 years had to have passed since the artist passed away in order for their music to be used freely. Nintendo had assumed that the 50-year mark had been met, but they were 1 month off from Ravel's passing. Thus, what did they have to do? In one night, Koji Kondo scrambled together the theme song that we know and love. And even more impressive, he did it from the music that was already in the game. Quote, "The song is just an arrangement of music used in the game." End quote. How is that even possible? This song is so iconic, and we think about it when thinking The Legend of Zelda. I recognize that there are similarities between the title theme and the overworld theme, but not much else. Have you picked up on any other similarities to songs in the game? Please share them in the comments below. Regardless, the whole concept is impressive from the gate. A sprawling open world, 8 challenging dungeons, a grand finale with incredibly complex dungeon layout. Old wise men. It's no surprise that the first Legend of Zelda blew so many players away back in the day and single-handedly kickstarted the Legend of Zelda franchise. Letting the intro screen play out, the game demonstrates the gravity of what is about to ensue.
The Legend of Zelda. Many years ago, Prince Darkness Ganon stole one of the Triforce with power. Princess Zelda had one of the Triforce with wisdom. She divided it into 8 units to hide it from Ganon before she was captured. Go find the 8 units, Link, to save her.
Although not the first game for its time with a decent plot, it is one of the most competent among its competitors. I mean, I think immediately of Mario and Dragon Quest. Mario, what do? You go and save a toadstool for 7 out of 8 worlds and then finally find a princess. In Dragon Quest, what do? You defeat a dragon lord who's terrorizing the land, and I guess you can save a princess if you want. This is almost like both of those put together. I don't know. I mean, I think Dragon Quest is probably the more competent of the two, but I do happen to think that Zelda kind of hits a sweet spot. It is very much functional, whereas the other two seem a little bit more in their infancy. Now, Zelda is not that riveting or well-developed, but I just think that it is the most present and functional. And realistically, the story is just a framework anyway for you to get into the meat of the game, exploring the world of Hyrule.
It's dangerous to go alone. Take this!
Thanks, old man. Zelda is a literal box of sand. I mean, just look at this environment.
I don't like sand.
Seriously though, this game gives you a sword and shield at the start and does nothing other than say, go! I mean, I admire how it doesn't waste your time. It can be incredibly cryptic, but it is certainly not unnavigable. The first dungeon presents itself quite readily, but players could explore a mass of the overworld if they so choose, swordless even. There really is no wasted time doing so either, because every enemy that you defeat can help you stockpile rupees, an absolute must for acquiring the necessary and desirable items throughout the way. The blue candle is a player's first best friend, giving way to many rupee secrets, essentially resulting in players trying to burn everything. You do get bombs from random enemy drops, but they are finite, so you're not going to really experiment with them as much. Experiment and explore you must, though, since the rupee drop rate from enemies is abysmal. Some of this exploration can actually be a bit confusing, while other parts just stand out like a sore Deku shrub. Armo statues and bushes cover stairs, while canyons contain entryways as well. The sword is upgradable twice, and while the heart container requirement may be steep for the second upgrade, it is well worth it.
Usually I will go for, if I'm going to, so if I want to no death run it versus just run the game, I don't care about dying. Like, I will go out of order to get certain items. This becomes really actually more important during quest 2, where you may only go into a dungeon like say in the second quest, you really kind of need the recorder in order to really get heart containers to get the silver sword before you really get into some of the dungeons, because the quest 2, and that's really wordy, so I apologize, but the second quest is so hard that you try to use every advantage you can to like maximize Link's health. So a lot of times, especially in that quest, you'll just go into a dungeon. Of course, you have to know where you're really going and what you're doing, but a lot of times it's best just to kind of get the item and kind of use the item around the overworld to find things like heart pieces and things like that, and just to make the game a little bit easier.
This type of experimentation is key to advancing in the game. The first Zelda game makes some of the greatest use out of the shops that I've seen in the series. The items you acquire, you either need or will benefit heavily from buying. These include, but are not limited to, a shield, arrows, potions, a blue ring that halves damage, meat, and so much more. Sell me some of that meat, boy. Additionally, heart containers are scattered throughout the land, and unlike future Zelda games, each one bumps Link up a full health ranking. Woohoo! A guide isn't necessary for the totality of the exploration, but if it starts to get frustrating, it doesn't hurt to resort to one. At the very least, it helps to look at the printout map to get a sense for your bearings. This will be vital to make your way through the rougher and tougher part of the game, the labyrinths. So I'm a Keaton, otherwise known as Kitsune. Kitsune is a fox, and though known as something of a kami, or a god, it can also be quite the trickster. Like the trickster fox, NES Zelda dungeons are prone to trick you. They are deceptively simple, but this deception works both ways. They also seem to be way too difficult. One element of this deception has to do with discovery. Aside from the first labyrinth being plainly visible, there is no real rhyme or reason to why one ends up finding a next labyrinth in the sequence. In my most recent playthrough, after I had already played the game, after beating the first labyrinth, I stumbled on the 8th and final labyrinth immediately by using a blue candle near the start of the game. And while I could play this out of order, to go from 1 to 8 definitely does not make sense with the game's progression. And those who know, Don't mess with Dungeon 8 until Link is relatively maxed out. Then there are, of course, some of the more infamous and heinous offenders where labyrinths, as they're called, are locked behind some kind of weird progression, something you would never think to even find on your own. I'm looking at you, Lost Woods and Flute Level. Once you are in a labyrinth, though, the combat can go both ways. While labyrinths 1 through 5 are more than manageable without a guide, the rest can be a bit rough. The rooms are crowded with enemies like Dark Nuts, Bubbles, Wizrobes, and likes, all 4 of which are a pain. The Dark Nut alone completely eluded me the first time I played this game with these awful side hitboxes. They have a literal genius AI where they redirect to Link's direction automatically, and the issue with that is that they are invulnerable head on. You have to hit them from the side or behind. So the fact that they are redirecting to face you no matter where you are turning and they kind of chase you makes it so you have to do some sick maneuvering with Link in order to hit them. I don't understand how people can fear AI so much nowadays when 1987 Legend of Zelda already had it in the bag. Don't even get me started on blue Wizrobes. These guys are just pricks. Although the combat is basic, if you don't fight smart, Link will get swamped by all of them and die suddenly. They do so much damage to you even when you have super armor. It's crazy. So there are some gameplay hacks I would advise or have been advised when it comes to the combat. For one, play the game with a responsive D-pad. The first time I played was on Switch. That was a mistake because the Joy-Cons simply don't do this combat justice. You really need a D-pad that's going to allow you to maneuver quickly and responsively. So even if you are playing on Switch, use something with a great D-pad. While you're doing so, play ruthlessly because these enemies, they don't fuck around. Blue Wizrobes will not attack you if you aren't directly in their line of fire. And of course, if you're not sure you can take the dungeon, buy a red potion for a low price of 68 rupees. This is really not low. The potion is usable twice though, and it restores full health. And once you start to recognize enemy patterns and get comfortable with Link's hitboxes, the combat will come much easier to you. Compared to the particularly challenging common enemies, the boss battles are laughably bad. Several of them can be one-shotted, and the strategies for others have no rhyme or reason. Still, it's worth seeing what some of the most famous Zelda baddies were like in their infancy. Hey Keaton, you know what time it is? No, what time is it? It's Miyamoto time, motherfuckers! Monsters are not the only things that became infamous through the original Legend of Zelda, so too did Shigeru Miyamoto, one of the main creators. It is a disservice not to credit the man as the progenitor and inspiration for the series, seeing as how he served 3 major roles for this first game. He was the producer, he was the director, he was the designer. Oh wow. This brings us to your new favorite segment of the channel. Miyamoto said, "What?" This bit comes from a 2007 Game Developer Conference. Let's take a listen.
Some people view Zelda as being part of this group, but when I created it, I had a different idea in mind. Some people think that this single-player game is one where you communicate only with the computer. But from the start, I thought that Zelda could create a different kind of communication centered around the game itself. And when I first showed an early prototype of the NES version of Zelda, it did not go over well in Japan. People were confused. They didn't know their objective. They didn't know how to move from stage to stage. They couldn't even solve the puzzles. And a lot of people said, look, why don't you just make one way through the dungeon, no multiple paths. But of course I ignored them all. Rather than making it easier for players to understand, I decided to take their sword away from the very beginning. you do that, then you know what you've got to do. See, I did this because I wanted to challenge them to find that sword. Because I knew that they would think about these problems. They would think before they go to sleep, how am I going to do this? Or maybe as they're riding to work in the morning. And at the same time, I wanted them to talk with other Zelda players and exchange information. Ask each other questions. Find out where to go next. Exchange information. That's what happened. This communication was not a competition, but it was a real-life collaboration that helped make the game more popular.
Oh, Mr. Miyamoto, why is the game so hard? Why can't you make it easier? Why can't you make it so I know where to go? Why can't you put arrows on the ground? I mean, there are arrows on the ground. Oh, Miyamoto at his finest, ladies and gentlemen. Gamers have a problem with the work, and rather than adhere to them, what does he do? The complete opposite. He takes the sword away and says, figure it out. Look, I respect this and I admire this, specifically with the fact that he deliberately made this game very challenging, especially in terms of your critical thinking. So much so that you actually had to go outside of the game so you could bounce ideas off of others. Dude, did you find the next labyrinth? Oh, did you know there's a secret sword upgrade in the mountain? Oh, if you bomb right here, you'll open a wall. Genius. He made the right decision, too, because, I mean, this game's legacy would not be the same without it being what it is. Now, that being said, the concept hasn't entirely withstood the test of 38 years, and I'm going to get into it. And let's take a listen from one of my good buddies here who, along with me, has not played this game until recently.
If I really want to start, trying to finish this game in a timely manner, I may just look up some guidance as to where to go next, or which dungeons to go, or sort of which path to follow initially, to help me.
Yeah, I don't want to give you too many tips. I think you should, if you're going to play it authentically, but don't be afraid to ask for help as well, because I think that's fine. And at the very least, just look up a map that would have been in the manual at the time. Because you're playing, you're playing with no map, only like a blank gray square with dots on it. That's not too helpful.
Yeah. Okay, I didn't know that the game manual came with a map. See, that's once again just not. I missed that part, and now that you mention it, I don't even think of associate games with manuals anymore or maps anymore. So it never even crossed my mind that probably that game had a map.
Yeah.
Which would have been helpful.
So to newcomers to the first Legend of Zelda, like me or my friend, even something as simple as the fact that the map is located in the manual can get easily overlooked. Why? Because, I mean, even if you're playing the NES game, on the service for Nintendo Switch, they're not exactly throwing the manual in your face. Or if you buy the cartridge online, it's not like most people are selling it with the manual. So if you go in blindly, I would understand how you might not even think about that. And then even with the map, there's some secrets that the map alone can't divulge. The locations of the hidden labyrinths, like the ones in the Lost Woods or the lake, must have been incredible word-of-mouth discoveries and gossip back in the day. But nowadays, how would you even know? Unless you had seen something or heard something. You could argue that this information is readily available via the internet, but I do think that you disservice yourself by going too far out of your way to find all of the information instantaneously. It may morph the experience for me, but I do personally think that it is worth playing alongside a guide. So I used the Legend of Zelda Ultimate Guidebook by Black NES Guy. This thing was a must, and I for me anyway, and I actually found it a strong alternative. I didn't use it for the full playthrough, but I kind of glossed through it when I needed to. And that was really helpful, especially for finding some of the secrets to expedite your playthrough. I do think, though, that I'm not really the person to tell you whether or not this game has aged too much. I mean, I did not experience what it was like back in the day. And for that reason, I went ahead and interviewed a couple people who were around for it. The full interviews are posted on my channel, and I encourage you to check them out after the video. But for now, here's a few highlights that I thought worth showcasing.
So we had the manual and the map, and we'd look at it and we'd play the game, read the manual, and we'd tell each other like what to do. We'd try to help each other, and we were able to get pretty far with just that map, the hint book, and stuff. And we did beat it at his place, and I later got a copy of it myself. But that was my first exposure to the Legend of Zelda around third grade at my friend's house, and in Western Pennsylvania, rural Western Pennsylvania.
So I think Super Mario was my first introduction to video games. So that, like, I fell in love with that. Like, that's kind of like my first memory of playing a video game on a console. But then there was this other mysterious game out on the horizon called The Legend of Zelda, and I would see the ads for it. There was a lot of silly television ads for it on TV, and it looked like kind of like a little hack and slash, or little shooter type of game with shooting a sword. And I didn't know, I wasn't super interested with the ads, but the buzz was going around school. Everyone's talking about this game, Zelda.
Their next door neighbor had a son that was a year or two younger than me, but we made friends, and I went over to his house one time, and he had the Nintendo, and not a system I had ever seen before. And I think we were playing, I think he had put in Bases Loaded. I think it was the first one. And I got looking through his games. I saw this gold cart, and that was really good marketing, I feel like, on Nintendo's part, especially with this game, because I mean, it stuck out, and especially as a kid, you're like, whoa, what is this? Like, this is really cool looking. And so I put that in and played it, and it was awesome, just because too, like, you could save your progress. That was like sorcery at the time. Like that was a frustrating thing with games sometimes, because you either had to put a password or something like that. And so to be able to, get items and things like that, and be able to save it and then go back to it and it be there, it was fun.
Okay, so for the first Legend of Zelda, I was living in Karachi, Pakistan at the time. I was visiting my brother and mother, who were living in the US. My brother was going to college. And when I came over, I came during the summertime. Me and my father came to visit both my mother and my brother, who were living over here. And nobody in my family was into video games at all, besides me, of course. So when I came over, I kind of wanted to get the latest and greatest Atari thing, because that was my only perspective into gaming. I knew nothing of any other type of system. Once again, you have to remember that back in 1987, or even before that, there was no such thing as internet browsing, phones, Google, all that other kind of fun stuff that we have today, or take for granted for that matter. Plus, living in a country like Pakistan, you're not really going to get any information on the latest and greatest consoles that are, being popularized by, ads over here in the US or Europe or wherever the case may be. So I had no clue that Nintendo was even a thing, much less The Legend of Zelda.
So it's funny, looking at the time, it's like you're playing it and you're not thinking, wow, this is going to change my life forever. It's a game, you're a kid, you're enjoying it, you're having fun, it's something to do, you're really hooked on it. I remember a feeling of like, there wasn't anything quite like it. Like, even on the NES, the games I played Mario 2, which I really love, and that was another one like I wasn't quite like anything else I played. But coming from the Atari, there was all those experiences where every game you saw in the NES was a new experience, a mind-blowing experience, because Atari, very simple arcade games, single screens, high score. NES had more longer games where you could actually complete more adventures with deeper gameplay. And Zelda was the top of those early games, that and probably Super Mario 2, that had like, it seemed like a sense of wonder, like you could do anything in this game, even though it's very limited in its structure. The structure it does is very, it has you feel like you're adventuring and feel a series of wonderment, like how big is this world. And what came with it, with the book and the map and the hint book, really added to that, because you could like really look at that map and see the squares that aren't filled in and kind of wonder where it's at. The hint book would tell you like little hints how to progress, and that really made you want to play more. And once you found a dungeon, for example, that was pretty amazing. You know, you just out wandering. And I think a lot of Zeldas, one thing I wish newer Zeldas had was just wandering out and you just find a random dungeon you can walk into with no lead up or anything. You just stumble in it and you can go do it, or you can't do it.
I don't know if it's just parents like me trying to brainwash kids into thinking retro's the best, but I know there are a lot of youngsters that are into retro games these days. It might be, I don't know if it's just because like retro's popular, like in popular media, like everything's about the 80s and that, this and that. But I know there are a lot of kids, like young kids that work at that I work with, or a lot of them like older movies and like talk about older games. So I think probably any generation could enjoy this game just because it's so good. And so I would recommend new gamers to play it, or even if you're not young and you're just new to gaming, and you want to get into it, I'd say this is a very accessible game. Like I said, when I first played it, I didn't know what I was doing, but it's fun just because it's easy to play. You just move left, right, up, down, have your sword, hit the Octoroks, look around, find dungeons. So I think even a new gamer would enjoy it.
It's one of those games where it's easy to get lost if you don't really know like really what you need to do to start off with. So I think it's one of those games where I think gamers should try it just because of, it's the first game in the series, and it's kind of see where it started and where it's gone. At least to give it a try. If you don't like it, that's okay. If you like games like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, great. That's where it's gone. Enjoy it. But I think it's one worth trying at least. But to enjoy it, you kind of have to I do feel like you have to do a little bit of research on terms of, all right, what is my character able to do? And, needing a little bit of direction.
Ever since I got a Nintendo Switch, and you have seen a lot of the videos, I cover a lot of Nintendo Switch content. One of the things that I absolutely wanted to do was really understand and play and just become, I'm not going to say subject matter expert, but that sounds too work-like, but it really does, I really do mean that. I wanted to become an expert on all things Zelda. And when I got the Switch, I decided that I was going to play every single game on this console that pertained to Zelda and beat it, which I did, at least the games that were released, for the modern console. However, as far as going back and playing some of these games, it is really just piqued my curiosity even more. I tried playing Ocarina of Time again. I didn't get too far into it, but it's such an interesting perspective that from people that have played games on a modern console, the quote-unquote modern Zelda games, versus some of the historical ones. And I can see a lot of people, and I don't know if this is true or not, whether people even consider modern day Zelda games as true Zelda games.
Please go ahead and watch those interviews as well as check out their individual channels. But now it's time for some conclusions. In researching The Legend of Zelda and listening to what it was like for those that lived through it, I recognize exactly how impressive the game is. There was nothing remotely like The Legend of Zelda for its time, and the game redefined what it meant to even play a game. It has also held up remarkably well 38 years later in terms of combat, exploration, and more. I actually enjoyed the tension of labyrinthian combat and flexing on dark nuts, whiz robes, and the likes. Get it? The likes? Likes? I hate these things. The game is very much playable with a couple of obscurities that could still technically be revealed by word of mouth. Heck, if you're struggling, you could even ask me for help. But help yourself to it regardless. The Legend of Zelda is iconic and in many senses a rite of passage that is well worth playing today.